everyone, and welcome. This is part 2 of our series on pandemics in perspective, and today we're going to be looking at modern therapeutics. Now, again, we're talking about, we had just mentioned in part 1, we had talked about the Spanish influenza, and we talked about how it was treated with hydrotherapy, and we talked about how it was treated with sunlight, fresh air, these type of things, and how people got better. Today, we're going to look at modern therapeutics to help with viruses. This is all going to be things that you're going to find in the medical literature that you can easily access. If you have you're in the United States, you can access PubMed. I'm sure that there are other access to these peer-reviewed journal articles in Europe. So you will be able to find them. If worst comes to worst, you can screenshot them and look at the article itself. But all references will be available. What's important about this topic is that right now we're told that the only thing that can save us are new experimental drugs and a vaccine which has never been really ever used before, a messenger mRNA vaccine to treat this terrible pandemic. And what I want you to see is that there are other options in the peer-reviewed literature that people are writing and talking about who don't necessarily believe the things I do, don't even know me, but they're just looking at this, applying the scientific method, and they're coming up with reasons. The first slide that we're going to look at is actually from the WHO. Now, this is quite interesting because this is what they're talking about, the novel coronavirus, and this was published in January 24th, 2020. Now, I want you to see this. Again, the WHO loves drugs, promotes drugs, and is behind this vaccine. They are friends with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the second highest donor besides the United States, which is no longer donating to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the WHO, is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So there's the United States number 1, who used to donate to the WHO, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is number 2. So this is a very vaccine-friendly group of physicians and thinkers and doctors. This is it. And notice what they say here regarding non-antiviral products. Listen to what they say here. This is from their own blueprint, okay? This is what they wrote in January this year, 2020, January 24th. This is what they say. Non-antiviral products not on the list provided, such as statins, heparin, high-dose vitamin C, were mentioned as products for which more discussion could be administered. Of note, further analysis of the citrus allele studied has shown the efficacy of high-dose vitamin C in preventing mortality from acute lung injuries as compared to placebo. This should be considered for an evaluation in the novel coronavirus. That's the WHO. They said we should explore vitamin C because of its effects to reduce acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is one of the major causes of death and lung destruction in those who get sick with it. Let's go to the next slide. So this journal, this is from the Journal of Orthomolecular Medicine. And they worked with a group of physicians from China, and they were using intravenous vitamin C. And they found that if they use intravenous vitamin C, that the mortality rate, this was in China, that they found the mortality rate went from 26% of everyone who came to the ICU to 4.3% if they used intravenous vitamin C. The Journal of Orthomolecular Medicine promotes using all kinds of vitamins to treat many conditions and diseases. And this is fascinating because this tells us that the science is there behind using a powerful, easily accessible vitamin to treat people and to reduce acute respiratory distress and may even inactivate viruses. Again, because why? Vitamin C is a powerful antioxidant, reduces cytokine storm, and also mops up any of the free radical damage that would be happening in the lungs, which would lead to fibrosis. And so now again, they were using it intravenously. I know of no other study where they're doing it intravenously, but they were apparently doing it in China, which is why they published this study. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, I love this study right here because what most people think about when they think about Chinese medicine is they think about acupuncture needles, moxibustion, and maybe wormwood. What they don't realize is that the Chinese medical pharmacopoeia is a vast treasure trove of herbs. many, many herbs. And in China, there's two forms of medicine that coexist. There is the traditional Chinese medicine, which is mostly herbs, acupuncture, moxibustion. Those things all exist. And then there's a gua sha. And then there's also the standard Western form of medical treatment. And the Chinese government, for its faults, whatever they are, allows both. So if you live in China, you could get easy access to all these herbs and anything without any harassment from the government. And no one's going to say, oh, you've lost your mind. That's crazy. You can't do this. No, no, no. You can go right in there. You can get your herbs and you can get treated right away. And this is also cost effective because to put everyone on a ventilator, to give everyone these experimental drugs would bankrupt the country. So knowing this, the government of China commissioned different provinces to use these herbs, which they know have antiviral properties. Published in the medical literature, they know that they have antiviral properties. They said the government commissioned them to use them to see if they could fight SARS-CoV-2. Now, I don't know how accurate the death numbers in China are. I don't know. But if they are somewhat to be believed, it will have much to do with traditional Chinese medical herbs than it will with a vaccine or any experimental drug that is out today. Think about that for a moment. So let's look at the quote. This is what the authors say. It says, TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine, is highly valued by the government of China in their campaign to contain and eradicate SARS-CoV-2. For example, Health Commission in 26 provinces have officially declared that TCM should be used in combination with conventional medicine in the treatment of COVID-19 patients. On February 17th, the National Health Commission of the People's Republic of China reported 60,107 confirmed COVID-19 patients. 85% of the total confirmed cases had been treated with TCM. 85% of the population who has COVID confirmed are being treated with traditional Chinese medicine. Now think about it. Today, whether it be in Europe or the United States, people say that's crazy. You can't use licorice root. You can't use astragalus. You can't use Japanese honeysuckle. You can't use these things. And yet here they are. They're using them. And if the numbers are somewhat to be believed, sounds like they're effective. Let's go on to the next slide. This is from the same study, and they actually index the references here of how you would prescribe these Chinese herbs, and they actually index it with other studies showing that these herbs are effective in treating viruses, which is deeply impressive. Some of them are, as I mentioned, astragalus, skullcap, rhodiola, which is an adaptogen, licorice root. I can't even go through them all, but I want you to see. And this isn't even all the tables in the study. You can go pull the study up. It's worth your time to read. And they talk about how this can all be used cheaply and effectively, which is absolutely amazing what they're able to find with this stuff. Let's go to the next slide. This one, I mentioned licorice. So glycorizing is a component of the licorice root. Now, this study was published in 2003, and this was dealing with the first SARS outbreak. So this isn't SARS-CoV-2. This is the first SARS outbreak. Now, what's fascinating here, if you look at the square letter A is a normal, untreated cell culture which has not yet been exposed to the SARS virus. The second one, in letter B, is one that is exposed to the SARS virus with no licorice root. If you look at D, you can see here, and D is a group of cells that were exposed to 1,000 milligrams per liter of licorice root or glycorizing, the constituent. And you can see that D looks more similar to A than it does to B, but look at C. Using 5,000 milligrams per liter of glycorizing, letter C almost looks as good as A. In other words, the virus was unable to take over the cells and destroy them because of the presence of glycorizing. And we know through the literature that licorice root has the ability to stop the replication of SARS viruses. This is impressive. Licorice costs pennies on the dollar. Pennies on the dollar, and they're using it in China right now to treat SARS-CoV-2. Are you hearing anything in the media? Is anyone having a national discussion on whether or not we should use licorice root? The answer is no, which may tell you more about this virus than you knew about it before. Let's go to the next one. This is from PubChem, and this is basically in the United States. This is basically a website which indexes all the different drugs and things that are used, and they list glycyrrhizic acid as a drug because it's used in confectionery, it is used in industry, and is also used in medicine. So this isn't, again, this isn't some a alternative medical publication. This is from the National Institutes of Health, and they're talking about glycyrrhizic acid, which is what you find in licorice, okay? And you follow the first arrow. It says glycyrrhizic acid has been developed in Japan and China as a hepatoprotective drug in cases of chronic hepatitis. In other words, it eliminates viruses that would attack the liver. It is able to treat that. In China and Japan, they're using this to treat that. And then he goes on, from January 2014, glycyrrhizic acid as a part of the licorice extract was approved by the FDA as an existing food sweetener. It has been approved by Health Canada to be used over-the-counter products, but all products currently on the status canceled post-marketed. This is fascinating that China and Japan are using this, and in Canada, they're not sure if they should be even allowing this. This is something that's safe. You can get in a licorice root, which you could steep in tea and drink. Let's go to the second one. Glycorizing. Second quote. He says, glycorizing. Go back one slide, and then it's the second arrow. Glycorizing is a saponin-like compound that provides the main sweet flavor of Glycyrrhiza glabra. That's just common licorice that we know. With potential immune modulating, anti-inflammatory, hepato and neuroprotective, and anti-neoplastic activities. Now, let me just break this down for you. Immunomodulating. What is it that scientists and doctors fear from SARS-CoV-2? That means they fear a cytokine storm. They fear that your immune system is going to take over and it's going to cause fibrosis of the lungs. Licorice counters that. The glycyrrhizic acid, which is found in licorice, counters that. That's the first part. The second part, it says that it also not only does it modulate the immune system, right? But it also says that it is anti-inflammatory, which also goes back to reducing systemic inflammation. That means when your lungs aren't going to fill with fluid, that means you're not going to have the same type of difficulty. The second, liver protective and neuroprotective, which this may be interesting. It may be something that can be used in people who have all kinds of different neuralgias, peripheral neuropathy, things like that. It may even be helpful for that. And then it says anti-neoplastic. That means it has anti-cancer properties. So just this one substance can fight cancer, hepatitis, different things that attack the nerves, like peripheral neuropathy, anti-inflammatory, and immunomodulating. Now, when it modulates the immune system, doesn't weaken it. It just stops it from overwhelming itself and destroying the human body. But as we continue, you have to think about this. Something that simple has all these effects, and you can buy in some places right over the counter. And in countries like China and Japan, they're using it in drugs to treat hepatitis, to reduce viral loads in the liver. Let's go back to it. And then he goes on. Then he goes on to say, notice in the next line, he says this: glycyrrhizin modulates certain enzymes involved in inflammation and oxidative stress, and downregulates certain pro-inflammatory mediators, thereby protecting against inflammation and reactive oxygen species damage. Glycyrrhizin may also suppress the growth of susceptible tumor cells, basically repeating themselves. But think about it. This isn't an alternative medicine publication. It is supporting natural medicine just by saying the different things that glycyrrhizic acid could do. This is impressive. Let's go to the next one. And again, where's the public service announcement saying, hey, let's all start prophylactically dosing ourselves with licorice root? It's not there. Let's all start drinking licorice root tea. Not there, which is telling us more. And again, these are all modern therapeutics that are currently being used. This is one of my favorites. I use this on a regular basis if I think I'm getting sick, but I use ginseng. Not always fermented ginseng, but I use ginseng. And the actual name of ginseng is Panax aquifolia or Panax quinifolia, which the word Latin Panax means cure-all. And so the ginseng in Chinese medicine is kind of as a considered a cure-all. It means it has all these different effects, whether it treats erectile dysfunction, whether it helps with radiation sickness from cancer, whether it even helps with cancer itself, whether it helps regulate stress hormones, but it even has antiviral effects. Let's look at exactly what they say here. So notice we see in blue. So either what they did here in the experiment is they took mice and they gave them different viruses, and you can see the viruses they gave them: H1N1, H3N2, H5N1, H7N9, and they gave these mice these different viruses, and they dosed them. They dosed some of them with the fermented ginseng, and they didn't give it to some of them. Notice what he says is mice that were inoculated with a moderate dose of fermented ginseng extracts samples and a lethal dose of virus were protected against weight loss with 100% survival rates during primary infection, as well as developing immunity against secondary viral infection. So what is he saying? He's saying that when they gave these mice a dose, they injected them with fermented ginseng, and then they gave them a dose of the virus, of these different viruses, they all lived. And not only they lived, but their body produced fighting cells for the next round of viruses. So it not only helped them to survive the first infection, but to fight for the second one. Whereas the mice that did not have the ginseng extract, they all died. Every last one of them died after they injected them with the different viruses. Again, not one word about ginseng. Not one word about ginseng and how it can help prevent viral infection. Yet, it's been used for thousands of years. You will find all kinds of medical literature on it in the scientific publications. Not one word. This probably tells us more than what we care to know about how the narrative of this virus is being shaped. Again, that very narrow window. Let's go on to the next slide. This is again showing how the ginseng works in the body, and it talks about uh, reducing respiratory infections. And as if you look at the slide, it shows how ginseng is going to block acute respiratory distress, constriction of the bronchioles, cytokine storm. So even they know, this article was published back, it was actually earlier this year, published in 2020. This article shows that they know that this can work to reduce systemic inflammation. It provides antioxidants that prevent fibrosis of the lungs. They know this. This is demonstrated. They can see this. They've studied it in animals. They've studied it in humans. They can see this, and they're suggesting that maybe this can be used in SARS-CoV-2. Uh, while they're suggesting that, they're actually using it in China. We probably won't know until a couple of years from now, when they look at the humans who were using it in China, how effective it was. But I imagine it's probably a good guess, particularly when there aren't very many answers concerning this virus. Let's go on to the next one. Now, this I really enjoy. This study was a fascinating study. This was published in 2011. And this study, they looked at selenium in the soil, and what they found is in areas where the soil content of selenium was very little, or there wasn't much selenium in there, they found that you get the most outbreaks of certain viruses. And you can see in the little map where they say, over in Asia, SARS, H5N1, H3N2, H2N2, CV as probably coronavirus, B3, whatever. and and in the yellow areas are where they show that soil is deficient in selenium. Now clearly there's places in Western Europe that you can see are also in yellow, and other places in the United States which are also in yellow. However, in these countries, we can also afford to ship selenium in. We can take it in multivitamins. We can also fortify our foods with selenium. So even though our soil doesn't have, in some areas, doesn't have as much, we can do it. Now, why is selenium important? Well, selenium is important because it's an essential cofactor to produce glutathione, which is one of your own antioxidants that your body makes, and is one of the most powerful antioxidants that we know of in nature. And its ability to quench free radicals, to help reduce viral load, and all these other things, that's what glutathione can do. As a matter of fact, there's been some studies suggesting that increasing glutathione can reduce Parkinson symptoms and Parkinson disorder type of uh, central nervous system destruction. It's pretty impressive. They've shown how increasing the dietary load of selenium has the ability to inhibit HIV. All these things, because selenium is an essential cofactor in the body. It may even have its own antiviral effects with it. Not exactly sure, but what's fascinating is that in countries where the population is particularly deficient in selenium, because they're only getting what's out of the soil, they have these huge outbreaks of viruses. That's kind of interesting to think about, that giving ourselves more selenium may harden the defenses for viruses to come. Let's look at the next slide. So this is a letter to the editor, and this is the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. This was also published in 2020. And what they do is they talk about selenium's role and possibly rejecting reducing the ability for the virus to replicate, and also reducing the cytokine storm. So they actually show on the map here, and you can see, in the corner, the red virus with the spike proteins attaching to the cell, and then they show it going to NSP5 and the uncoating of the virus and viral replication. But what you look at is that if you take dietary selenium, it actually blocks these different pathways. It can block the pathway that leads to viral translation. It can block the pathway that leads to antioxidant stress. All these different things that would normally happen in the system, selenium can actually block without even producing more glutathione, which we already know it does. GPX1 is glutathione peroxidase 1, just so you know. So this is the idea that selenium could potentially have a powerful role in reducing this viral infection and actually saving lives. But again, where is the public service announcement saying, why doesn't the population take more selenium? Or encouraging people to eat foods rich in selenium, eat Brazilian nuts, go ahead and eat food fortified with selenium, take selenium supplements. You're not hearing any of this. Yet there it is, right in the literature, there for the taking. These people don't agree with me on every point that I believe in. I don't even know what their religious beliefs or non-religious beliefs are. They're just looking at the data available, and they're making these clinical inferences on things that can possibly be done to help people and reduce the spread of this virus. And yet, all we ever hear about, wear your mask, stay home. We're hoping that we're going to get a vaccine. We're hoping for another antiviral drug to come online. And yet, we have all these things, these modern therapeutics, which are just being ignored. And it's here in the literature. Let's go to the next slide. This one I enjoy. So we look here, this article also published this year. N-acetylcysteine. N-acetylcysteine is a precursor amino acid group that works to help us build glutathione. So not only does selenium help us build glutathione, but N-acetylcysteine does as well. And what's fascinating about this is that we already use it in hospitals. So if people have poisoning from aspirin or things like that, we actually give them N-acetylcysteine to help their liver, to help their lungs. We actually use it in nebulized treatments to reduce inflammation in the lungs. This is fascinating. They're talking about it. They're saying this article, this journal article, medical hypothesis. They're talking about how this can be used. It's something we already have. It's something that we could use easily. We could roll out. We could give to people. And notice what it says: while no clinical trials investigating the use of N-N-acetylcysteine and COVID-19, trials completed using N-N-acetylcysteine for influenza, acute respiratory distress syndrome, and VAP have shown promising results in reducing disease severity and duration of hospital stay. In other words, they already have seen how this can save people's lives, get them out of the hospital, and help them to recover. They already see it. This isn't them just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something will stick. They have a scientific grounding for this. Again, in our previous discussion, we talked about the reason why probably so many people died during the Spanish flu in 1918 was that they were dead set on using their drugs and using everything that they had and ignoring natural means like hydrotherapy, fresh air, and sunlight until they were forced to, by just observing, use sunlight and fresh air and seeing people recover. Think about how few times you ever hear anything like this and ever see any journal articles published showing that this stuff could indeed be effective and we're just not using it. Think about the push that we have right now that the only thing that will save us, that will get us out of this pandemic, is a vaccine. And yet we're told that N-N-acetylcysteine has already been shown to work in certain conditions to get people out of the hospital and help them to recover. Again, we already use it for aspirin poisoning. We already use it for that. And yet it's ignored. But there's a good reason why it's ignored. And it's the 400-pound gorilla or the giant elephant in the room. It is what has to be talked about. Let's go to the next slide. So this was published earlier this year, which you can see. This is directly from the National Institutes of Health in the United States. And this was published in March 16, 2020. And they were already starting right away getting this vaccine, and they're already starting to dump money in it. They were already doing all of this. In other words, from the very beginning of this pandemic, the only thing we were going to start talking about to save lives is the vaccine. It seems that the narrative was set up right away that we weren't going to talk about licorice, we weren't going to talk about N-N-acetylcysteine, we weren't going to talk about selenium, we weren't going to talk about ginseng, we weren't going to talk about hydrotherapy, we weren't going to talk about sunlight, we weren't going to talk about any of this. The focus was always going to be right here. And that should bother us, particularly when we look at history. Let's go on to the next slide. Here it is. This is from a medical publication, and it says, and it was published in April 2020. And you can see the title, $30 billion gamble. Pandemic expert calls for making COVID-19 vaccines before we know they work. Think about that. How many of you buy a car without test driving it? How many of you buy a house without seeing it? How many of you buy any product without knowing it's just going to work? You're going to put good money into it. The only people who would do such a thing are people in government where their money doesn't matter. And they're willing to take billions of taxpayer dollars and start funding vaccines. This is why we have to go this route. We are going to dump all kinds of money in this. And notice what the headline here says. There is one word exit strategy for the devastating COVID-19 pandemic, which is crippling the economies around the world, and it is licorice. Nope, that's not what he says. The one word is sunlight. Nope, that's not what he says. It is vaccines. The reason why you don't hear about licorice, the reason why you don't hear about sunlight, the reason why you don't hear about hydrotherapy, selenium, ginseng, and all the others is because we're dumping billions of dollars in the one thing that's supposed to save us. Didn't they try this with the Spanish flu? I know that we consider ourselves smarter today, and it failed. We will see in other presentations of other times they've used vaccines, and it didn't pan out quite the way they wanted. But for now, you have to understand that we have been sold a one-trick pony. We can't think of any other therapeutics except for this. And governments and everything are aligning itself to say, you need this. And there are reasons behind it, but let's go on to the next slide. I love this article too. This is from another science publication. What I love about it is it says that U.S. secures 300 million doses of coronavirus vaccine candidate from Oxford. In other words, we don't even know if it works in the United States. We're going to go ahead and buy 300 million doses of something we don't even know that it's going to work. This is craziness. And you wonder why you don't hear about anything else but vaccines. This is incredible. A one rush that we have to have the vaccine. And here it is. It's full head of steam, going straight for this, no other therapy. Let's go to the next one. However, just so you know, that while we're dumping billions of dollars in the vaccine, while we're buying these drugs even before we know if they work or not, one of the companies has already said that they want complete immunity from anything that can happen. So we're giving them money for a product we don't know that works, and we will not be able to hold them accountable if it kills people. Would you buy a car that you never see, you just give someone money for, that you've never test driven, and if it blows up, if it fails to work, you can't hold that person accountable? Would you do that? Most people would not. Most people would not buy a house that way. They wouldn't even buy a computer that way. They wouldn't buy clothes that way. But here we are, we're ponying up billions of dollars to buy a vaccine, which this company says they are not going to be held liable for. That means you cannot sue them in a court of law. They are going to get 100% immunity. So if their drug kills, if it causes the spread of virus, if it makes people injured, if it causes children to become sick, causes neurological disorders, it doesn't matter. They will be held not responsible because we bought the vaccine without it being thoroughly tested even before we even knew it worked. This is what you would call madness. But this is where we're at. This is where we're at. Let's read the quote from the CEO. So I just want you to see just how benevolent the CEO is. This is what he says. He says, "We want to cover the whole world," Soriat said, "so everyone can get access to this vaccine." In other words, we can't be held responsible for something we're going to give to the whole world. We can't be held responsible for that. So you guys buy this, we're going to give it to the whole world. But if we were held responsible, we couldn't get the vaccine to the whole world. Now think about it. We're told the lockdown can never end until we get a vaccine. We're told that the vaccine has to be bought before it can even be made. And once the company produces the vaccine, they are not going to be held responsible. That's a lot of power. You don't see the manufacturers of licorice supplements having that power. You don't see the manufacturer of licorice supplements calling up federal governments and saying, "Hey, guys, we think that everyone in your population should start taking licorice prophylactically, and you need to buy it before it's even tested. Also, if anyone gets sick from taking licorice root, we're not going to be helped." It's no comparison. No comparison at all. Instead, what we find is that there is no discussion about natural remedies, natural dietary strategies, sunlight, hydration. There's no discussion at all. Instead, it is all vaccines. Why? Because both government and giant industry are invested in it. This should leave us some pause and reflection and make us think seriously about what's going on with this coronavirus. But We will leave it there for now. And in our next presentation, we'll be talking about the lockdown. We'll be talking about why we're having the lockdown, how effective it is, and what is its impact on us, and what's the strategy behind it. But for now, may God be with each and every one of you, and I thank you for listening to this presentation. I hope that you will be blessed and challenged at the same time. Feel free to look up every single article that is cited in here and see if these things are so. Blessings.